Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing my book haul for the months of July and August. So this is going to include the books that I bought at WorldCon in August, and also it's going to include a ton of things that I bought in Seattle before I went to San Jose for WorldCon. And then because I made no plans to actually do a video discussing WorldCon, I'm going to tack that on the end of this video here. Everyone I was hanging out with at WorldCon, all of the other booktubers who were there, have already done like WorldCon videos. I made no plans to do this. I did no vlogging. I didn't really think about what I was going to say about it, but I will do that a little bit at the end of this video here as a sort of part two. I'll have the books that I got at WorldCon as the last part of this book haul, and that'll be a nice little bridge there. So knowing that I was going to be probably buying a lot of books when I went to Seattle and San Jose, I was very, very good in the month of July and only bought 3 books total. The first is a used book, and this is a copy of The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, which I have never read and did not previously own a copy of. Now, I do intend to read The Silmarillion someday. I have a sneaky sort of gut feeling, though, that I might not actually like it all that much, so I do not have concrete plans to read it anytime soon, but I figured I really should have a copy of it to at least round out my Tolkien collection, and so that I can feel like I mean it when I tell people that yes, someday I will read this book. Now, I believe that this edition is actually a first American edition of The Silmarillion, which is not, like, super rare, but like mildly collectible, because it's not that hard to find. And so I was able to get this for a pretty normal used book price, and it is just cool enough that it will go nicely with my collection that is a 2nd edition box set of Lord of the Rings and a shiny golden anniversary in a slipcase edition of The Hobbit. It does look very nice under the dust jacket. It's got this nice green cover with, you know, a pretty spine, pretty design on the front. So this, I think, is pretty much going to just sit with the rest of my Tolkien collection until someday I have some reason to actually read it. And then the other 2 books that I bought in the month of July were both novellas. These are On a Red Station Drifting and The Citadel of Weeping Pearls, both by Aliette de Bodard. These are self-published print editions, and I tossed these both in my Amazon cart after reading and really enjoying her most recent novella in this loose short fiction series, the Julia universe, which was The Tea Master and the Detective, which was from Subterranean Press. I read a review copy of that. I will link my video review of that. It made me want to read her other novellas in this sci-fi world, so I stuck these in my Amazon cart and bought them when I had enough things in there to be able to get free shipping. I think I've heard of the 2 of these. You're probably better off reading On a Red Station Drifting first. I'm not sure about that though, but that is the order that I plan on reading these 2 in. And then in August, I acquired a total of 2 books that were not from my trip. The first is one $1 used book. This is Iron-Hearted Violet by Kelly Barnhill, which is a middle grade book. I now have tons of Kelly Barnhill books. Well, not tons. I now have 3 of her middle grade books plus her adult short story collection, and I still haven't read any of them. So I am the worst in that regard, but I couldn't resist picking this up for just $1. And then in the month of August, I also won a Goodreads giveaway for an arc of Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. Now this is a book that's coming out in January of 2019, I think January 1st it says on the back here. Diane Setterfield is the author who is best known for having written The 13th Tale, which is one of those sort of more general fiction books that I kept thinking for years I was eventually going to get around to reading because it was so popular, and then I never got around to reading. So who knows if I'll ever read that one. But what interests me about this is that even though I think this is going to end up being more on the general or literary fiction side of things as opposed to on the fantasy side of things, this is supposed to be very heavily influenced by folklore and fairy tales. And the cover is absolutely gorgeous looking. So I'm looking forward to figuring out what Diane Setterfield's writing is like and what this book is going to be all about. So everything else that I have here came from my trip to Seattle and San Jose. People I was hanging out with at WorldCon were like amazed that I was showing so much restraint in book buying. And I kept telling them, no, you didn't see what I just did in Seattle. This is the natural reaction to being freaked out over having just bought this many books. And so, guys, do you see now? Do you understand? So when I was at my parents' house, my mom and I went through a bunch of old stuff, and we ended up with like boxes and boxes of things to bring to half-price books. They actually ended up giving us a relatively large amount of money for all of that old family stuff, and my mom apparently didn't want to buy anything at half-price books, and she told me I could spend all of it. And then, for some reason, she was surprised when she found me in the, mass market paperback sci-fi aisle with a literal shopping cart full of mass market paperbacks. I don't know why she was surprised. Now, the reason I kind of go to town buying old sci-fi mass market paperbacks whenever I'm in the Seattle area is that I don't see nearly as many of them in used bookstores in New York. They're just way harder to find here, and I have theories about why that may be, but I'm just not certain. I think it might be a space issue. Old mass markets don't sell for a lot of money used, and I think used bookstores in New York are better off using that space for hardcovers and trade paperbacks that they can get more money for. It might also be the culture of who is giving books to used bookstores and how many of what type of books they have. But regardless, when I shop used bookstores in the Seattle area, I hoover up old mass market sci-fi paperbacks because there is no guarantee that I'll be seeing cheap copies of these books anywhere else anytime in the near future. So all of these, I think, were priced as bargain books at $2. The first is probably the one I was most excited to find a print copy of, and that is The Steerswoman by Rosemary Kirstein. This is the first book in, I think, a trilogy that I've had recommended to me several times by people I trust. This has actually been on my Goodreads TBR for a while now, and my understanding is that this is a series that blurs the line between fantasy and science fiction a little bit. I also know that this was going to be hard for me to find in print. I was going to have to, like, interlibrary loan it or something unless I wanted to read it on ebook, because I believe these are out of print from traditional publishers, and the versions that are currently in print are self-published. I believe this was first published in 1989, and this was the mass market paperback that I was most excited to find. The next book I have here is The Exile Waiting by Vonda and McIntyre. This is not the book of hers that I always go looking for whenever I'm in stores with lots of mass market paperbacks. The book of hers that I am forever eternally looking for and never find is The Moon and the Sun. That is the book of hers that I most want to read. This one, however, I believe is the book of hers that takes place in the same world as Dreamsnake, which I have read, and I'm assuming it's not as good because no one talks about this one nearly as much, but I am curious to read more about the world of Dreamsnake. So I picked this one up. And the next one I have is one of those things where I only recognized it at all on the shelf because Goodreads recommends it to me constantly in its recommendations algorithm. And it is called Halfway Human by Carolyn Ives Goodman. I know no one on Goodreads who has actually read this, which surprises me a bit given how vehemently Goodreads thinks I will like it. And it is older science fiction by a female author that deals with gender. I believe this is about a genderless main character. This seems to have been published in the 90s. I have never heard anything about it, which genuinely surprises me, so I go in blindly with no idea whether it's good or not. And the rest of these mass markets are all me filling out series that I have already purchased like the first books of. So I already have a copy of Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson that I bought used for like $1, and now I have Green Mars and Blue Mars, which complete out this trilogy that I have not yet started. I have no guarantee that when I read Red Mars I'll like it enough that I'll want to continue with the series. But now I have the entire trilogy and I don't have to worry about reading the first book and then not having access to the second two if I want them. Kim Stanley Robinson is one of those sci-fi authors who is just much talked about and much praised. His hard science fiction has a lot of fans, including people whose opinions I trust, and so I have selected this series as a series I would like to try. Another sci-fi series that I would like to read is the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. That's her science fiction series. I have now read The Curse of Chalion, which is the first book in her World of the Five Gods, which is her fantasy series. I probably am going to want to continue with the World of the Five Gods before I dive into the Vorkosigan Saga. That said, I had previously bought a copy of Cordelia's Honor, which is a bind-up of not the first two in publication order in the Vorkosigan Saga, but the first two in a reasonable reading order. I think they're like 1 and maybe 7 in publication order. And so when I saw that there were a bunch of other books in the series for $2 each, I bought as many of them as I could, and I know there are still holes in the series that I will need to fill before I have something like a reading order I can dive into. But the ones I bought are Ethan of Athos, Falling Free, Borders of Infinity, The Vor Game, Mirror Dance, Setaganda, I have no idea if I'm saying that right, Memory, and Civil Campaign. So these are the ones that I now have in addition to Cordelia's Honor. I am really not sure what the correct reading order for this series is, and I know it's already messy because I'm going to be starting with one of the bind-ups, and then the rest of these are not of the bind-ups. As far as I know. So if any of you who've read these can give me some hints as to which ones I need to be looking for now so that I can actually read the series in any reasonable order, leave a comment and I would be grateful. And then I bought 2 final books at Half Price Books that were not from the bargain mass market paperback section. The first is The Foxwoman by Kij Johnson. This is the first published of her 2 fantasy novels that deal with historical Japan and Japanese folklore. The other one, Fudoki, I read several years ago and really enjoyed at the time, and I've sort of been keeping my eye out for a copy of this one ever since. These are matching editions, so that is nice for me to have. And then the last thing I have here I threw in that shopping cart on a whim. It is the most expensive of the used books that I bought, but I got it on this total whim because it's from an academic press and I was probably never going to run across this book anywhere ever again. And this is called Daughters of Earth, Feminist Science Fiction in the 20th Century. Now this is a combination anthology of feminist science fiction stories from the 20th century, each one followed by an academic essay about that story, and that idea fascinates me. These are all science fiction authors that I have not read, even though some of them I have definitely heard of, and I really like the idea of reading an anthology like this with accompanying academic essays. So on I went to WorldCon, and I was remarkably restrained, I believe, in book buying at WorldCon. I only bought 4 books, 2 new and 2 used. I am, I think, always very restrained in new book buying. I am much more reckless with used books. So the 2 new books that I purchased were actually both things that I had already read in ebook form, and I really wanted to own print copies of. So the first was actually my favorite of the nominees in the new YA award category this year, and this was In Other Lands by Sarah Rees Brennan. It didn't win the award. Akata Warrior won the award, and I liked that book too, so I'm not unhappy. But this one was my favorite because I had very emotional reactions to this book. My next video, I promise, will be the wrap-up where I talk about this book. So more than, I keep having reasons to mention this book, and I keep having to say, hold on, I will wrap this up, I promise. It's gonna happen. But this was probably the one book that I was thinking I most wanted to find a copy of at WorldCon, because this is actually from a smaller publisher. It's from Big Mouth House, which is the YA imprint of Small Beer Press, so I haven't actually seen this for sale in bookstores, and I was pretty sure that someone at WorldCon was going to be selling it, and I was right, and I was very happy to find it. The other book that I was happy to find a copy of that I have wanted to have in print, in part because I really liked it, and in part because it is physically gorgeous, is Under the Pendulum Sun by Jeanette Ng. I read and reviewed a NetGalley arc of this back when it was released, so I'll link that. And Jeanette Ng was one of the Campbell Award finalists this year. She also did not win. Rebecca Roanhorse won, which I similarly am not grumpy about, but still. I saw Jeanette Ng on several different panels at WorldCon. It got to the point where I sort of felt like I was stalking her around the con. She is very brilliant, and if you're not following her on Twitter, you really should be. And while she did not have a signing during the convention, she did stealth sign copies of this that were in the dealer's room, so I got one of her stealth signed copies that has a little note in it, and I'm very happy about that indeed. It says, "Dear stranger, you hold before you a tome of fairies and theology. I trust it will delight and deceive and bewilder." And then on the final day of WorldCon, it was Monday, a bunch of my friends had already gone home, and I was digging around looking at the used books in the dealer's room, and one of the used booksellers where I was looking had discounted on the final day all of their mass market paperbacks to $1. That is my type of deal, and I found one that I've been looking for a long time, and this is Green Rider by Kristen Britton. This is one of those books that people have recommended to me both on BookTube and in my real life. It is the first in a series, so I have been watching out for a cheap used copy of it for like over a year now, and this is the first time I finally found one. And then the last used book I bought was Sea Kings of Mars and Otherworldly Stories by Lee Brackett. Lee Brackett is one of those underappreciated female sci-fi authors that I keep hearing about over and over again and have never actually read anything of hers, nor have I ever, bought any of her books or put any of them on my TBR or anything. So this is one of the old Fantasy Masterworks editions, so I thought this was one of those things where I just had to pick it up at WorldCon when I saw it, because these are UK editions, and they are not easily found in the US. And this book specifically is a short story collection. It says, "Here together for the first time are the very best of Lee Brackett's evocative stories of Mars and Venus." So this is like a collection of pulp sci-fi short fiction, and the question is, why on earth is it a fantasy masterwork and not a science fiction masterwork? Oh, I don't know. It seems like someone here is operating on some different standards of what qualifies as science fiction versus fantasy. Nevertheless, it has a very pretty cover. It's an author I've been curious about, and I have at least one other book in these old Fantasy Masterworks editions, so it will match at least one other thing on my shelves. So those were all of the books I bought at WorldCon. I did make one other purchase in the dealer's room that was a jewelry purchase. I bought this lovely pair of earrings. I'm gonna hold them close to the camera so you can see them there. From the shop Polymer Garden. Everything they sell is this sort of polymer artwork that looks very, very nice, and it all looks sort of like fairy wings or leaves or insect wings and that sort of thing. They are on Etsy, and I will link the Etsy shop down below. I'm very happy with these as we get into fall weather here, and I'll be wearing like jeans and denim and stuff a lot more than I do in the summer. These will be very good with jeans outfits. I also want to show you something that I made at WorldCon. On the first day I was there, there was a workshop that I absolutely couldn't not go to because it was on brand for me so very much, which was a mini top hat making workshop. So I went and made this mini top hat out of felt. They gave us a pattern and showed us how to use the pattern and hot glue gun to put together a little top hat and decorate it with stuff. I was slow at making my top hat, and I was, you know, grabbing at things to decorate it with at the end when they were literally packing everything up around me, but I managed, and I am really pleased with this. It is made with black felt, and I used ribbons and trimming around the whole body and brim of the hat. The top is this giant button that was exactly the size of the top of the hat, and then I stuck another button and some trim on top, and turned all this extra ribbon into a big bow. It's on a little mini clip here, which is not actually strong enough to hold the thing on my head. When I wore it for a couple of days at the convention, I used a couple of extra bobby pins, and that worked just fine. But now I have this mini top hat as a souvenir. Several people while I was wearing this told me they thought it looked like I had a cupcake on my head, which I'm not displeased with. And now I have this souvenir mini top hat, which probably belongs somewhere on my bookshelves. I'll find a better spot for it than on top of other books. I don't know. It goes somewhere there. And so that is the end of things I acquired at WorldCon. In terms of getting books signed, I did go to some author signings, and basically I was collecting signatures in this anthology, which is The Starlit Wood, edited by Dominic Parisienne and Novel Wolf. It has a lot of authors in it who were at WorldCon and had signings. So this was convenient for me to be one book I could have in my bag and bring to a lot of different signings. I already had one story in this signed from an event that I went to in New York, and that was Amal El-Motar's story, Seasons of Glass and Iron. The ones that I got signed at WorldCon were In the Desert Like a Bone by Seanan McGuire, which is actually my favorite thing of hers that I think I've read. Even The Crumbs Were Delicious by Daryl Gregory, which is the only thing of his I've ever read. The Super Ultra Duchess of Fedora Forest by Charlie Jane Anders, which is freaking awesome, and I am so glad I got to tell her I thought so. And The Other Thea by Theodora Goss, which was another one of my absolute favorites in this collection. And I am just now reading the note that she wrote. I didn't realize, because I geeked out to her a little bit about my love of fairy tales. She says, "To Kelsey, from one fairy tale lover to another, best wishes." Oh, but anyways, I was very happy to meet a number of the authors who were in this collection, whose stories I enjoyed so much, and to collect their signatures. This seemed like a very economic way of doing that. I was also personally very, happy inside to see how many of the authors I approached with this collection asking for a signature were just very, very excited to see someone coming at them with this collection, because everyone who worked on this collection seems to have loved it, and they were very happy that someone, loved to read it. Strangely, though, and I'm going to gripe a bit here, because there was absolutely no programming at this WorldCon whatsoever on fairy tales. This was my first WorldCon, so I don't know if that's normal or not, if fairy tales just aren't discussed on panels at WorldCon. I don't know what sort of subgenre snobbery is at work, but I felt that my favorite subgenre had been snubbed a little. I do get that WorldCon leans more heavily towards sci-fi than fantasy, but fantasy as a whole was definitely well represented in the programming. So it did baffle me that there was absolutely nothing on fairy tales. I did attend many panels that I thought were very, very good, though. I took notes on all the panels in this little notebook, and I have no idea if I'll ever actually reference those again, but at least I feel good that I have some record of what I went to and who I saw speak about what. There may have been no fairy tale panels, but I went to 2 different panels on mythology. And it was very interesting comparing and contrasting those 2 panels, because the first one I went to was called New Ancestral Myths, and that was intentionally an extremely diverse array of panelists with diverse backgrounds, pretty much all of whom are using those diverse backgrounds and mythologies in their work. And then the second mythology panel that I went to was called Mythogenesis. And this was a slate of all-white panelists who were very awkwardly aware that they were an all-white panel and like vocally confused about how they were supposed to have a comprehensive discussion on mythology with an all-white panel. And at that point it struck me as very, very strange that those panels had effectively been segregated and that the all-white panel got to be called Mythogenesis, like we're going to be talking about myths. And then like the panel for the people of color was the new ancestral myths, as if non-Western mythologies like haven't been around before now. I don't know. Anyhow, that was something that I thought maybe could have been handled a little better. In terms of other things that could have been handled a little better, there were some problems with the readings being all held in one very small room. Some of those readings were group readings for groups of the nominees. Some of those readings drew very large crowds that were no way going to fit in like one of the tiniest rooms in the convention center. I went to several readings, but having heard what was going on from other people earlier in the convention, I chose to go to readings that were more sparsely attended. The other problem with that room was that it inexplicably didn't have a mic, which was weird because all of the other rooms that all of the panels were in had like tables with mics and sound systems, and they put all of the readings in the one room that didn't. And then the other thing that I saw pointed out on Twitter about that reading setup was because it was a room with a podium to stand at and read instead of tables and chairs, like where the panelists would sit and talk. It was basically not accessible in that setup to any authors who couldn't stand up to read, who had to sit down. But those, I think, were my only complaints from my personal experience at WorldCon. I had a great time. I had a wonderful time hanging out with booktubers that I was meeting in person for the first time. As I said at the beginning, all of them have already uploaded videos. I am late on this. So the booktubers who were there were Rachel from Colonnati, Bree from Bree Reads Books, Claire Rousseau. Those three plus me were in a group hotel room. And then the other booktubers who were there were Paul from Common Touch of Fantasy, Joe from Final Blow Joe, Thomas from SFF 180, Denise Harwood, and John and Bex from Night Hunter Books. I will link all of their channels down below. You should definitely check all of them out if you're interested in science fiction and fantasy booktubers. Both Paul and Denise recently made booktube comebacks following WorldCon, so if you're not subscribed to their channels, now would be a great time to hop on that. This was by far the biggest gathering of booktube people that I have attended in real life, and it felt very affirming to me to be welcomed by this group of people I have admired from afar for a very long time. And I feel like I came away from WorldCon with some truly solidified friendships, and that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And that made going to WorldCon worth it on its own, even if there had been no convention, even if there had been no dealer's room or panels or like Hugo Awards or any of it. The Hugo Awards were really fun to go to, by the way. Oh, I haven't told you guys yet about the musical that was so bad. So the first evening of the convention, one of the sort of evening entertainments that there was like a new original musical from, I guess, like a local theater troupe that was supposed to be like a sequel story to Snow White. So I thought, hey, I'll go. It was terrible. It was so bad. I feel so terrible saying that, but everyone I know who was there left either before or at intermission, including myself. I did not stay for the second act. And I think to go into greater detail about that episode of WorldCon would just be cruel to all involved, so I'm not going to. Much more enjoyable for me the next evening was the steampunk ball, where there was dressing up and lots of dancing. I threw myself together a steampunk costume that looked like this, and I danced the night away, and none of the other booktubers wanted to go to the steampunk ball, and I just could not understand why. But that was my WorldCon, and that's also the end of my July and August book haul. Let me know, back to the books, if you've read any of these, if you want to say things to me about them. I'd also love to chat with you in the comments about anything WorldCon related. Anyhow, I hope you're all having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.